Hello and welcome to Talking Marketing, an AMA Boston podcast where I chat with marketing professionals across various industries, and I try to get to the core of what makes their work impactful. I am Alan Ibrahim, your host and director of content for the American Marketing Association's Boston chapter. And today, I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Jeff Greenfield, the CEO of Provalytics. Welcome, Jeff, to the show.
Thank you so much, Alan, for having me here today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to chat with you. We had our little prep call. We had our little pre-podcast call. But I really want to get into your work at Provalytics and also your background, how you got there, and answering that ever-present question of why do we do what we do? So let's get right into it. Provalytics, can you tell the folks at home just what your company does, how it got to where it is today?
Sure. Provalytics is attribution for a cookieless world. We're quickly in the process of moving to a world where the ability to track users across different websites is going away. I mean, it's just the reality. I know that for a lot of folks that are living in the digital age right now and they've marketed as digital marketers, that's all they know. But the writing is on the wall because of all the privacy changes, the walled gardens. But cookies are the next thing to go. And all of measurement up to this point has relied upon these third-party cookies to put together this user trail. And so I created a new technology that leverages AI and machine learning to be able to provide marketers the types of results that they need in order to do the proper reporting and planning, but it doesn't utilize user-level data. And that's the most important thing. The writing's on the wall in terms of all of these changes happening. A lot of marketers, depending upon the industry they're in, they're already seeing it. And so we're kind of looking ahead for what's coming down the pike. And that's what Provalytics is.
There you go. Short, sweet, and to the point. I love to hear it. This company got started coming from the early 2000s, I believe, the sort of wild west of digital marketing. You yourself have a little bit of history in that era as well. Can you talk about that era of how we got to, again, digital marketing in was I think 2008 you mentioned?
Yeah, so in 2008, I started one of the first multi-touch attribution companies called C3 Metrics. That was really in the wild west of digital marketing, where we could tag everything and we could literally see every single impression, all the way through to clicks, all the way through to conversions. I mean, it was amazing. We tagged everything, and you could actually show someone that an ad they had 9 months ago where nobody clicked through to their website actually was having an impact now, 9 months later, which would make the ROI completely different. And we literally were living in this world of deterministic, where you had every single touch point. It was a tremendous amount of data to collect, but utilizing machine learning, you could crunch through it all and be able to see what was actually working and what wasn't working. And when Facebook first came out, they allowed tags on Facebook. So clients' campaign would go live, our tags would go up so we could see when they scrolled to the ad in their news feed. We had tags everywhere, YouTube, Amazon, all over the place. But then all of a sudden, the walls started coming up and the world started to change. But by that point, C3 Metrics was pretty embedded in a lot of enterprise clients. And it was around 2019 or so when I exited the company. I'd done as much there as I could. And I was pretty much done with measurement. I thought it was completely done. Stepped away for a while trying to decide what I was going to do next. And over the next couple of years, I saw a lot of new emerging measurement technologies. And they were talking about these magic pixels. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Magic pixels. Because, I built some of the first pixel technology that was used in measurements. I was like, now they're magical. I have to see what these things are like. And I thought I was going to become an investor and an advisor to these companies. And I got demos from all of them. And I was just like, I'm hearing a lot of garbage. Like, it's bogus. Like, these pixels are not magical, but they're making it sound like they are. And then I saw a culmination of events that was going on. In addition to all the privacy changes, the cookies were going away from Google Chrome. There were additional privacy changes going on in the iOS environment. And to top it off, everybody had to switch over from GA to GA4, which they all just did recently. And so what I saw kind of this massive disruption in the measurement space. And I said, I think there's an opportunity to jump back in here and provide a solution that's easier to implement, because that was the problem with pixel technology, is had to get the pixels all up. And then the other problem was you had to wait for like 3 or 4 months until you had enough data to collect so it was statistically significant. But with our methodology, there's nothing to put up, and we're able to actually go backwards and analyze past campaigns. So I saw an opportunity to jump in again and provide a solution that would help marketers get the answers that they actually need. And so that's kind of my beginnings, if you will, in the measurement space, was at 2008. And what led to that is kind of interesting, is that I was buying media for a large weight loss client, and the order came down that we had to cut budget. So did an analysis to see what was working and what wasn't working. And remember, back in early 2008, everything was last click. That's all there was last click. So based upon the last click analysis, the non-branded search terms, things like weight loss, fast weight loss, cheap weight loss, those terms were very expensive. So the return on ad spend for those was horrible. So, so as a result, I cut all of those terms, and everything seemed to be fine for about 3 weeks. And then 3 weeks later, got a call from the CEO who said, "What is going on? Sales are dropping like crazy." And I was like, "Oh my God, what did we do? What did we do?" And then I realized we only did one thing. We cut out the non-brand search terms. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe last click isn't giving us the whole picture. I kind of knew that already. But when you just change one thing and you see such a drastic result. But what was interesting is that it took 3 weeks. And the reason for that is that every business and every channel that you buy within a business has a certain time frame that it takes for it to actually go into effect. And it turned out for non-brand search, it was about 3 to 4 weeks. And so obviously put money back into those without a doubt. And that was the head scratcher that made me realize, okay, well, maybe there's something more going on here. And we need to figure out how to be able to tell what to cut, what not to cut. And when we have more money, when we're lucky enough to have more budget, where can we put the gas pedal down and really accelerate? And that led to the genesis of building out the first model, which was C3 metrics.
Yeah, it sounds like you're sort of analyzing with all these clicks the past, present, and future of terms, and imagining, well, not only is this not performing well now, but maybe let's look at how it does in a couple of months and be patient with that, because 3 to 4 weeks is a pretty significant time frame, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, but when we look back to historical campaigns, back in the Mad Men era,
right?
They would plan an integrated campaign, TV, print, radio, and then they would sit back and roll out the campaign for like 3 to 6 months and not do anything. They would just, and then they would do a post-campaign analysis is what would happen. And then they would see what was actually going on, what worked and what didn't work. But what's interesting about trying to decide like what you do next, and this is one of the differences between what we built at C3, what's out there today, and what's available with Provalytics, is that what most marketers do is we look at reporting. We look at what happened yesterday, what happened last week, what happened last month, and we look for trends, and we look to see who's our best performer, who's our worst performers. And we do that because, here we are, it's next month. Let's say we have more money. Where do we spend the more money at? And maybe we should reallocate. So obviously the folks who perform the best, let's give them some more money and see how they do. Now, back 10, 15 years ago, that was the best we could do. But in today's world with AI, what we can tell the machines to do is amazing. We can tell them, hey, over the next 30 days, my budget is going to be raised 10%. And I'm willing to cut everything down to 0, and I'm willing to double everything. I want you to run through every possible scenario. And we're talking about running hundreds of thousands of simulations to find me the best possible media plan. And that borrows kind of from the world of marketing mix modeling in terms of forecasting, but it's very sophisticated. And what you get outputted is all of the scientific back-end math that would take a team of 20 people a week to do, but the computer can do it in minutes, which is absolutely amazing, because buying media is both an art and the science. And everyone talks about how they're data driven, but I'm not seeing marketers really leveraging the science part as much as they should, Because once you leverage the science part, then you can really spend time with the art and the fun stuff. And so that's really what Provalytics also does, is provide that forward-looking scientific aspect so that we don't have to figure it out. Because the truth is, most marketers, we really don't figure it out. We kind of look at who our best performer was, and we say, all right, they've got to be the best tomorrow.
Right.
And sometimes they are, but sometimes it would be better to give more money to somebody else who can do more of the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah, you're basing it on what you think works, and it isn't always guaranteed success. I guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the closest metaphor I have is sort of like, we have, like, I was on a bunch of car trips with my family recently, and my father is like very stubborn immigrant dad, is the type of person who doesn't like to trust Google Maps. And the pushback I gave on him was like, they have all of this data. They already were collecting like road and traffic data that is simply light years above whatever shortcuts you think you can take. Instead of complaining that it's wrong or that it's doing the work for you, enjoy the drive more. Like let it guide you and then follow where it's taking you. Does that feel kind of similar to what you're saying with these trends?
Very similar. And I'll give you another analogy. One of my clients, who's also a lacrosse coach, his name is Ted Moon. Ted is a world famous marketer.
Mm-hmm.
I've known Ted for many years. And sometimes when you look at the data that comes out from using the science and using the math, it's not always supposed to agree with you. You're not always supposed to say, oh yeah, I knew that. There should always be something where you're like, what? Because sometimes the results are like, you want me to give money there? And Ted, the way that Ted looks at it is he looks at everything through the lens of a lacrosse team. And he's like, you've done so well, you've done well so far, but really what you need to do is you need to make sure your ball gets passed around to some of the better players on the team. And in many instances, your better players are the upper funnel, the ones who do less selling and more branding, because what they do is they end up bringing more people into your funnel. And as a result, you can end up selling more. So to Ted, everything is a lacrosse game, which is a perfect analogy, because what this data is supposed to do is sometimes surprise you and also sometimes challenge your assumptions.
Right. If it was simply feeding into your assumptions, then you technically wouldn't need it. You already, you're just getting somebody to confirm your gut check.
That's exactly right. And really the purpose of it is twofold. Figure out the things you don't know so that you can report, but also most marketers use it as a tool to be able to raise budgets, to be able to go to your client and say, hey, we did this. This is a test. This is how things worked out. And because of the results of this, we know that if we get more money, we're actually going to be able to deliver more sales.
Mm-hmm.
And so by using this data, you can actually get more budget, which is what most marketers want.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of the funnel, speaking of experts' advice, we talked briefly in our prep call about the book Lemon by Orlando Wood, and how it explains the sort of changing nature right now of the marketing funnel. I guess, Jeff, why do you think that dollars have been shifting so much from the top to bottom of that funnel, and why is that working?
Well, just to talk briefly about it, in the beginning of the book, it talks about how in 2006, marketers started testing digital marketing. And, back in, and really, if you go back a little further, it's kind of interesting because, in the late 90s was when the internet was exploding. And, the internet companies were talking about, radio stations, TV stations, and newspapers are going out of business. That's what they were saying. And then the crash came. And in 2003, the radio stations, TV stations, and newspapers were saying, can you believe those internet folks were saying we're going to go out of business? The internet is going to be like a small regional newspaper. That's what they looked at it as, which is kind of crazy. And then what happened is around 2005, boards of directors asked their CEOs, what is our company's worldwide web strategy? And the CEO says, let me ask that question to the CMO. And the CMO was like, oh my God, I've got 30 days to figure something out. So they started doing some internet buys. And so they did. They took a little bit of money out of branding and put it over to do a digital buy. And what they were amazed by is what they got back. What they got back at the end of the month was an invoice that showed they got X number of clicks. So it was really cool for a marketer because prior to the first digital buys, when I would do an ad buy, I wouldn't know the impact that it had until next year when we did a marketing mix modeling study. I'd have to wait a whole year. And now I did a buy and I got feedback within a month. And then over time, it got to the point where I could log in and see it on a regular basis. And so the reason that marketers started shifting dollars was because all of a sudden they could actually show what they purchased. And that was pretty exciting because they say, yeah, I did this and I got that. Aren't I doing a good job? But what the book shows and demonstrates is that the impact was actually the opposite, because as we move money from branding, these digital buys all tend to be lower funnel. And when you move money lower funnel from the top part of the funnel, you have a smaller funnel. Your reach is less. So as a result, you're going to end up selling less. Your advertising actually has to work much, much, much harder. And now we've even gone lower funnel. We have this whole new media called retail media. You know, someone's shopping on Walmart.com and your competitor, someone's putting it in their shopping cart and you have an ability to give them a coupon to buy your stuff instead. So, I mean, that's so lower funnel. So there is this kind of race to the bottom because it's so accountable. You can actually measure it. And so there's this fear, which has been proven to be true, that when I do something that cannot be measured, I'm going to be embarrassed and my budget for it is going to go away. A great example of that is CTV. A lot of folks today are testing CTV. They know it's working, but they can't measure it because it doesn't show up in Google Analytics. Podcasts like this, these don't show up in Google Analytics because now we're living in this era of these new no-click digital channels. Podcast and CTV are a great example, but also TikTok. There's no clicks in TikTok to speak of. It's all impressions. And so marketers tend to gravitate towards things that are going to help them keep their job. And the best way to do that is to buy stuff that can be accurately measured. But I'm here to say that really, if you want to keep your job and get even a better job, you want to move towards things that expands the brand, that improves ROI. And that has been proven time and time again. It's branding. It's the upper part of the funnel. It pays off in spades. It really does.
Right. Because yeah, when you're focused on that smaller part of the funnel, all that stuff is measurable, even in this world of immeasurable data. And actually branding keeps coming up on Talking Marketing, because I do think that high quality branding sticks. And you mentioned a really interesting concept to me and how Provalytics, for example, lets you guys capture that lag in branding and how, you know, maybe it doesn't seem like it's performing well, but over time it actually performs exponentially better than other types of data collection. So I guess my question then is are there some companies that are doing branding really well that you're impressed by? And also what makes good branding besides really nice photos?
That's a great question. I mean, if you looked back to like the last Super Bowl, you saw a lot of ads. In fact, most of them were like this TikTok style, very fast. They're designed for this world that we live in today. But there were a few that actually did a very good job of telling a story.
Right.
And, there's a lot of work that's involved to be able to make someone feel something, because those TikTok ads, they make me feel something. They make me feel nauseous. I think that's what they're designed to do. They make you feel sick. They scatter your brain a little bit. And as a result, you're captivated by them. And the whole social media experience has all been about, activating that aspect of your brain. But there are some companies that are kind of doing an anti-version of that. And there's a concept out there in the digital world called VSLs, which are these long form infomercials, if you will. And you'll see them sometimes in Instagram. You'll see them sometimes in Facebook. Facebook will allow a marketer to upload like a 35 or 45-minute video. And marketers are finding that when someone starts watching it, if they get to like about 3 or 4 minutes in, there's a high degree of likelihood that they'll watch the whole video all the way through. And that's a great branding experience, if you will, there. And one of the best that's doing a great job of it is this physician company called Gundry MD. You'll see a lot of their ads also in the Outbrain type ads where they have the bananas in the frying pan that are on fire. And you'll see these weird ads, a picture of like a liver, and it'll ask you if you have a fatty liver. Maybe maybe it's just me because I'm over 50 and I'm getting targeted with these things, but
I was
their
gonna say I'm
ads,
not seeing those, but I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
but their ads are amazing because when you go to their landing page, you cannot order. So if you click on an ad, you cannot order. All you can do is watch the video, and the button to buy does not show up until the 45-minute mark.
Whoa.
So and you're like, why would you do that? Don't you want someone to actually order? But they've done the research and stuff like that. So that's an interesting form of branding, using these long form videos that tell a story that really suck people in. And the videos are all the same. The only part of the video that's different is the little thumbnail at the beginning, the first 6 seconds. So they do a lot of A/B testing of that. But in terms of larger brands, I would say, Airbnb is the best known example that killed off most of their direct marketing and went to more branding, more telling stories. And that's paid off for them substantially. And we're starting to see more and more brands that are doing that because they realize that you need to keep that funnel full. But what's happened in a lot of larger companies today that have many different lines of businesses, you don't have a unified measurement. And that's a huge issue for large brands with lines of businesses, because it's almost impossible for the C-level to understand how these different lines of businesses interact with each other. Because you can have some brands that when you advertise a lot on them, they lift other brands. And some brands, when you advertise on them, they hurt other brands. But if you don't have a unified measurement system where you can look at everything through a single lens, you're not going to be able to see what's going on. And I think one of the shifts that we're going to see, because as we're moving away, because of all the privacy and stuff like that, we're actually moving away from pixels. They're in the process of going away. And I think we're going to see kind of this second movement inside of a lot of larger companies, where we're going to get into the second generation of analytics. This is still the first generation. When I started C3 Metrics in 2008, there was no analytics team in most companies. Then I saw them, like, by 2011, they hired like one person. And now these companies have, like, some large companies, hundreds of people on their analytics team. But the problem is that they're running around because there's so many different approaches. So I think this second generation is going to come in where we're going to look from the bottom up to create a unified approach that doesn't utilize pixels, because then the C-level can get all of their questions answered.
You mentioned Airbnb, which I was also going to reference, in how I don't know if you've seen their most recent ad campaign, but it's essentially these like little vignettes of different travelers talking about how, oh, we went to Japan and our host, taught us how to make sushi, or we went to Italy and they like showed us around the sites and showed us all the history. And I love examples like that because, like you said, it's not even about the product. It is about the story of like being a world-worn traveler who goes places and meets interesting people. And that completely differentiates them from your average like hoteling service, which these days tend to brand more on like luxury and comfort and convenience. So it seems like they're really nailing that.
And that ad spoke to you because I can see the way you speak about it, that it was inspirational to you. You now want to plan a trip to do some of those things. I mean, and that's what's great about it. Brands should inspire us. I heard many years ago that BMW, that they designed their ads not for people in their 40s, but that they were trying to inspire 13 and 14-year-olds that when they turned 40, that this is the car that they've always wanted to buy. And I thought, well, that's incredible. I can't imagine how they were able to get the money to do that from the CFO, because especially in today's world where you have to plan for it. But the idea behind branding, though, is that it can have that long-term lift and that long-term impact, even over many, many years. But of course, you have to be able to demonstrate that it is having an impact, not only today, but at least in this quarter, maybe next quarter, in order to continue getting that spend. And that's really important. But when you do branding right, it inspires people and it has an impact that can last a lifetime, because those impressions that happen when you're younger, they stick with you forever. They really do.
Right. So my next big question is about privacy. But before that, I want to jump ahead actually and mention a new term that you taught me, which is advertising Adstock. It's kind of what you're talking about. You rank a brand higher so that it has the longer lag of impact than anything else. Can you explain a little bit more about that concept? It's sort of similar to what you're saying here, that you build the fondness for the brand early, and then over time people associate it higher in their brain.
Yeah, advertising Adstock has been around for many years, but essentially the idea behind it is that when you put an ad out there and someone sees an ad and they get exposed to it, they say in their brain, some people will say, oh, that's for me. Let me go buy that right now. There's other people that'll say, oh, I have to remember that for later. And other people, they're like, they just notice it, but it just leaves a little tiny picture in their mind and it sits there. And then the next time they see the ad again, this is why you have to have frequency. The picture gets a little bigger. And then on the third or fourth time, they're like, oh yeah, I need to check that out. Then they see it again. They're like, okay, we have to go this weekend. We have to go pick that up, type of thing. So advertising ad stock is that the concept is that you're going to get a percentage of the impact of the ad, obviously on the day that it ran. But then it doesn't just drop down to zero. If the ad connects and the creative is good and the messaging is right, then what will happen is it'll decline sharply, but the lag can occur over a long period of time. Sometimes, 3-4 months, depending on the medium and depending upon how strong the message is. And what ends up happening is that over time, the impact from those lagged messages, as they call them, those add up sometimes to be more than the initial impact. So it's very, very powerful. It's something that's used in marketing mix modeling. We utilize it heavily at Provalytics because we want to be able to see what that impact is. Now, it was primarily designed for like TV and radio, and it is obviously there for print, but the impact is definitely there as well in digital marketing. There was a study done many years ago with Quaker Oats, back when Yahoo was the site of the internet here in the US. Quaker Oats did something that you don't see anymore. They did a whole page takeover. So when you went to Yahoo in the morning, all there was this, 75% of your screen was Quaker Oats, healthy breakfast cereal, right there in your way. And it lasted for one day. So what ended up happening that day? Well, obviously, tons and tons of visits went to the Quaker Oats website, of course, because it was right there. They clicked on it. But what was unique about Yahoo at the time is that they also had the #1 search engine. So for that day, searches for Quaker Oats went through the roof. So did healthy breakfast cereal. So that was on a Monday. On Tuesday, the ad was gone. So did visits to QuakerOats.com drop down to zero? No, it tapered off and went down over about a week, and it never went down to the previous level. It stayed up just a little bit and stayed there as a result of that branding. So did searches for healthy breakfast cereal, and so did searches for Quaker Oats. And so even though the ad wasn't there, people were still typing it in because it had an impact. And that's an example of ad stock in the digital space.
Yeah, I love that. And I like to ask questions like that because I know a lot of our audience may not be familiar with all the jargon, and it sounds like you were very experienced with that. And it's an example of good branding. I think that there is poor branding that may, put a title in your head. Like people like to reference catchy jingles of the 90s and 80s, or products that, are infamous. And we're still talking about them, but I'm not thinking about, for example, using the Cars for Kids service. I just know that they have a catchy jingle and they're in my head. That's not a good thing.
Right.
And that's an example of branding that does not achieve its, intended goal. But looping back, like I said, yes.
I'm just going to go back. There is an ad I just remembered as you were talking about that. There's an ad lately I've been seeing on TV for drive time. And there's an aspect in the ad where the guy gets so excited and he yells out. And it's just, it's just like, okay, it's an easy way to buy a car. And it looks like people are happy and excited to buy it. And it always makes me smile when I see it. So it's kind of stuck in my head as well, too.
There you go. The ones that work really well.
Yes, they do.
So looping back to the privacy conversation, I think this is really important, especially as somebody who's working in a company that's dealing with like the post-cookies world. Jeff, are you nervous or worried about the state of privacy on the internet? Because as times change, as better than I do, we have a little bit like less and less direct privacy online. And so I wonder if that makes you nervous as somebody capturing and working with a lot of that free data in there, and especially as somebody who's been working in this field since like the late 90s, how having more access to data may or may not even be a good thing.
Well, I'm not worried. I'm not concerned because I built this company around the idea that that data is no longer going to be available. I do know that people are definitely freaking out because the ability to target, you can't target the way you used to be able to, and you definitely cannot measure. But the writing is on the wall. I just got off of a call with a client who, because of a letter that the Health and Human Services sent out for HIPAA compliant companies that have to deal with HIPAA, they're now in the process of removing Google Analytics from their website because HIPAA has come out and said, or Health and Human Services has come out about tracking technologies when people are logged in. I mean, there's been a lot of interesting things that have happened. The tax websites have gotten in trouble because when we all filled out our taxes, Google Analytics was there, the meta tag was there. And let me just back up and state that when there's a JavaScript, a piece of JavaScript from outside the website, on the website that you're on, it can read everything on the website. It can read everything that you put into a form. And where it goes, nobody has control over that. Even if the website you're on has a contract with that company, who's to say what they're doing with it? And that's really the big concern, is that you fill out a form, you click submit, and that information goes off, and who knows where it ends up at. And so that's really the worry. And we've kind of, what's happened with pixels is that now you go to a website and 75 or 80 pixels will load. And then if you follow that downstream, your information over the course of like a minute ends up at like 300 or 400 or 500 different websites. It's just absolutely incredible. So I think we've moved the pendulum too far over, and it's now time for it to swing back, and it's going to swing back very, very hard. So I think that we've already seen that iOS has made a substantial movement in this area, stopping the tracking across different acts with the ITP and the ATT. The iOS 17 move, which is going to strip off any unique query strings. Anything that looks like PII data is going to be stripped off. So the GCLIDs that people use in Google Analytics, we believe, are going to be stripped off. There's going to be a lot of information that's going to be stripped off. It's going to hurt a lot of folks in terms of used to passing data back and forth. And then on top of it, we got Chrome, which is going to get rid of third-party cookies. So the ability to be able to track someone across the New York Times and to your website. And then the next thing that's going to happen after all this is eventually IP addresses are going to be going away. You won't be able to see those because under HIPAA, IP addresses, even an anonymous user who's coming to visit your site, if they visit your site where it's talking about a specific condition, let's say pregnancy, an IP address is considered to be HIPAA compliant information. So any information that's related to healthcare should not have any tracking information on there. And this has all just come out recently. And there's now class action litigation going on around this old video piracy type stuff where they're treating tracking to be like you're videotaping people. So it's putting sites at risk. We've got the CCPA, which is now going out, and now there's a bunch of other states that are coming out. So the reality is that for most marketers that have been in this space for the last 15 years, the way you've done business is going to change radically over the next 18 months.
Yeah, this stuff is all super fascinating to me. I hope we are, again, not going too into the weeds for folks. This is really important, though, for people to understand. Like you said, those Apple and the iOS privacy changes extend really far. I mean, that's a multi-million user base. And one of the features I noticed that like also doesn't get talked about as much with, like, there is the do not tracking stuff, but there's also even email masking. The fact that Apple defaults when you make an account on your iPhone or on your iOS device to say, hey, do you want to just not give them your email? We'll give them a dummy email that'll forward to you. And that is huge. I mean, even like I finished my digital marketing degree a year ago, and one of the most important touch points was collecting emails for email marketing. Like that is a concept so essential. And I mean, yeah, you think about how many websites I've put my email into that have just sold that or given it to 200 other people. And to finally see the end of that and to see what Provalytics is doing to say, okay, marketers, there are actually other pieces of data that we can give you that you have access to that are not incriminating, that are not email addresses and personal data or IP addresses. So
Yeah,
really important stuff.
yeah, and I'll add to that that it's the new way of doing business has to do with both the way you buy the media and then the way you measure it. And when I say measure it, I mean report on it and decide what got the right ROI. And one of the things that we've done, because that changes the whole game in terms of attribution, we spent the last several months putting together an attribution certification program that we're offering to folks in the marketing community at no cost. And folks can go to attributioncertified.com, enroll for free. It'll take you about 30 to 45 minutes to read through the lessons, but it talks through kind of the history of how we got to where we are. Obviously, it talks a little bit about lemon as well too, and shows what's coming down what's happening next because of all these privacy changes. I think listeners would get a lot out of it to be able to say, hey, I understand some of the issues that are going on, and I kind of know the right way of looking at things today.
Right. And again, this stuff is important for marketers and end consumers. So I'm definitely going to include some of these links in the show notes for people who want to do a little bit of research.
Right.
Lots of insight here. And Jeff, I kind of want to pivot now to talk a little bit more personally. I mean, you're my guest. You are a speaking sort of a mouthpiece for your company and for your work, and I love that. But you're also a father. You mentioned to me before that your daughter is entering a similar business to yours. I guess I'm curious, did you actually nudge her into that work, or did she find her way there naturally? Because I know a lot of like marketers and people like us are parents, and they're like, oh, do I want my kid to get into this crazy work or no?
No, I didn't. My daughter, she went to, she studied creative writing in college. And then when she got out, there's not too many jobs for creative writers, except in the advertising space. So she ended up first working on the brand side. She ran marketing for a very large auto dealer group. And, I helped her along a little bit in terms of teaching her about digital marketing. She learned a little bit about it in college, but you know how it is. It's like breathing from a fire hose because things change constantly. And then she spent some time at some other brands. She's now running programmatic for a large B2B agency out in Oakland, California.
Wow.
So she switched from the brand side to the agency side because, she likes to try different things. So she's enjoying it. She's loving it. As a father, it's exciting to be in the same space because we can have the same war stories with each other. She can tell me things that she sees from her side of things, and I can tell her things that I see from my side. So we're able to help each other out in terms of that, which is wonderful.
I love that. You must be very proud, right? Because
of course, absolutely. Yeah.
It's super satisfying when you can kind of nudge each other or help each other out in those little ways.
Yeah.
And another thing that I wanted to ask you about related to your work, though, is how you've changed your schedule in the past couple of years. You've changed your methodology from working for yourself to sort of working for agencies and companies. Do you see you are a sort of a champion of the 9 to 5, or at least of the structured work schedule these days? Because I think that's pretty uncommon, actually. I know a lot of my guests are like, I worked my 9 to 5 and I hated it, and now I work for myself. And you seemed like your arc was sort of the opposite. Is that the case?
Well, my arc was, I started several companies. I scaled up C3 Metrics, where it was like a 24/7, up to like 50, 60 employees. And then when I exited there in 2019, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I started coding again, playing around with the startup. And then a friend of mine who runs a very large company asked me to come on board to build out a new division for him. And I really didn't want to do it, primarily because I'd never had a job in my life. I'd always worked for myself.
Right.
So, but my wife encouraged me. She's like, why don't you try it? Try it at least for a year, see if you like it. You've always built teams. It'll be fun for you to be part of a team. So I did it. And that was very structured. The things I didn't like about it is that you know, it was great ego-wise. I was part of the executive team, but I didn't really do much except
Right.
I spent most of my time in meetings. And I'm not a meetings type of guy. I like to do stuff. And so I got kind of bored. So
Yeah.
after about a year and a half, I left, but I took away several things. So, you know, here I am, I'm scaling another startup, but
Mhm.
I'm doing it a little bit differently. You know, the things that I took away from that job is that my weekends are sacred. Like my first
Right.
week with that job, when Friday rolled around, I shut down my work laptop. I left my work phone on my desk and I didn't look at it till Monday morning. And I was like, wow, this is what people talk about a weekend. I now understand Saturdays and Sundays are so awesome. I really had no idea because I was always working. So
Mhm.
now, you know, weekend comes along. Do I check? I check, but I don't do any work on Saturdays or Sundays. I just don't do it. The other thing that I don't do is I don't work at night. You know, when I'm done, when we get done recording this, I'm done. In fact, it's now past 5 o'clock. I should already be done, but we're
Right.
sitting here, we're having a great conversation, so I'm
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So I try to cut out early, like around 4 o'clock each day. And my mornings, I also take my mornings off. I go and I go at breakfast and I spend a couple of hours typically reading something that is completely different. Like I just ordered Rick Rubin's new book on that came out in January about creativity. So I'm
Ooh.
looking forward to start reading that. And so I
Yeah.
just find that if I'm able to wake up in the morning, exercise, go to the gym, have a great breakfast, spend a couple of hours doing something that's not related to the work, then when I sit down in the early afternoon to actually get work done, I am incredibly productive. I am incredibly present. And then I'm able to completely shut it off very quickly when the day is done. And I find that I think that way I'll be able to work a lot longer because I really love what I do, but you
Yeah.
can't live to work. You have to have a proper balance. And running startups before I didn't,
Mhm.
but now I feel like I've got a good handle on it, or at least a better handle.
Right. It's always an evolving process. Again, that's why I was so excited to ask you about that. Is I've it literally had guests advocate for the opposite mentality, right? Of like once you work for yourself, your work schedule is self-dictated, your freedom is self-dictated. But there with each thing comes pros and cons. You know, working for yourself means that you don't sign out. You don't log off
Right.
at normal time. You don't take vacations. You don't have weekends anymore, which can be a huge cause of burnout. Like being able to say, like you said, put the work phone away and just turn it off and go exercise, go be a dad, go be a husband. Like that's so valuable and makes your work better, in my opinion. Like you're saying, when
Of,
you're there in
of,
the afternoon, you're more productive and you're
of,
engaged with it more.
of course it does. You know, I mean, the best thing that any marketer could do, anyone who works for themselves to do, is to block out their calendar, make sure people
Yeah.
can't book time then. I mean, that's the best thing you can do is you have to take time for yourself. Otherwise, you gotta move your body. That's the other thing when you work for yourself. Most of the time you're sitting. So you got to
Yep.
move your body. You got to make sure you're eating right, getting the right fuel. You got to sleep well. I get at least 8 hours a night of sleep. And then you got to take time for yourself because otherwise, why are we busting our butts so hard for what? Okay, for
Hmm.
for for a heart attack? I mean, it's just ridiculous. You know, if we
Exactly.
work so hard, we're never going to live, and you have to treat each day like it's your entire life. Because I've
Hmm.
heard so many entrepreneurs that say, "Hey, you know, when this happens, I'm going to go do that." And I always say to folks that I work with, I say, listen, you need to assume that today is going to be the best it's ever going to be. Because if it's something you're waiting to do, you better start doing it today because it may never happen. Because I've seen that happen so many times. So you have to, you know, take the long breakfast, take the long lunch, get everything done you need to get done. And, you know, you'll have time to get work done because if you work for yourself, you're probably as efficient as hell and you can get it done in less time than you could ever imagine.
Beautifully said. And I want to underline everything you're saying there because it's so important, especially I know these new people that are getting into the industry, they may hear some of those influencers, some of those business folks that say, you know, put in the time, but it's not exactly the way to go, at least in our opinion, it seems. Um, and speaking of creativity, We talked a little bit. This is sort of my last big tentpole question, about like how creative people tend to come up with the best ideas in marketing and advertising. The example you gave was that Slack was a chat app for a separate product, and they realized that this chat app that they created just to communicate with each other became their product. And so, and related to that, something I learned about you without even asking you, like, what do you do in your free time, was that you have had a career in the entertainment business as a magician. So I know this is a tough one, but I'm really curious if you have an answer for it. How did your career as a magician inform your work today in marketing and business?
Well, it's interesting because I've looked at it a lot. I've had an interesting career path that has definitely not been linear.
Yeah.
But I've looked back at it to try to figure out, what is the connection? Because there's always, even though sometimes things don't seem interrelated, there's some relatedness there. You just have to kind of find it. And what I realized is that, when I was a magician, as an entertainer, your job is to make people smile, make them happy.
Right.
You show them something, you help them maybe think differently about things.
Mm-hmm.
And what that leads to is hopefully stress reduction. Now, I know some people listening may say, well, whenever I see a magician, they stress me out because I don't understand how they do it. But it still is fascinating and fun to see things that you can't explain. It maybe helps you expand your mind a bit.
Right.
And so when I saw that, I looked at what I've done over the last 20 plus years, and I realized that, yeah, I'm in the analytics business, but really when you break it down, what is it? Well, the job that marketers have to do is so much more difficult than it used to be. I mean, it used to be that what marketers did is they sat in a room and they started throwing out ideas, coming up with great ideas to create these ad campaigns. It was very, very creative. But now, because of digital, it's become, very, very involved. There's all these moving parts. And as you start to roll out a campaign, it's almost impossible to figure out what's working and what's not working. And this privacy stuff makes it even much, much worse. So even though I built this company, Provalytics, that gives people the better answers and helps them figure out what to do next, really at the end of the day, what it really does is it helps people have a better life. It helps reduce stress because with Provalytics, you don't have as much stress. The answers are there for you. You can figure it out a lot easier. So that's what I kind of see as the connecting rod, if you will, between the magic and that. But in terms of how the magic helps me kind of think today
Mm-hmm.
is, at a very early age and throughout my career, I've always known that and to use the cliche, you have to think outside the box, and
Sure.
you can't force that. You have to be able to understand where that comes from, and you can't force answers. It's kind of like the concept of being a writer, and you sit down and you're like, okay, I'm going to write today. And of course you can't force this
Yep.
writing. And it's like an artist, they can't force themselves to paint. It has to come from someplace, and it comes from someplace inside. And what's fascinating about that place is that that place tends to come alive best when we're sleeping. And so what I've developed over the years is a habit of making certain I get enough sleep,
Mm-hmm.
but I also have a notebook besides my bed. And so that when I dream, because that's where the best ideas come from, although they may not make sense, I've actually trained myself that I wake up from dreams 2
Mm-hmm.
or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I grab my notebook and I start writing in it. Sometimes I can't even read the writing, and I write in it. And so I've got notebooks from like many, many years. And in there's gold in them, then in those hills, in those notebooks, there's gold. You just have to
Yeah.
know how to look for it. But what I find is that when you tap that side of you where you're dreaming and you expose it and you open it up, it opens up a part of you that enables you to be able to think more creatively and honestly think outside the box.
Beautifully said, Jeff. Yeah. And it sounds like my key takeaways are take longer naps and take longer breakfasts, and your work will be really good.
Absolutely. 1,000%, Alan.
I love to
1,000%.
hear it. I'll make sure to tell my parents that the next time they ask me how my job search is going. uh, Jeff, this was so fun. Thank you so very much for chatting. I've learned a lot, and I hope the listeners have learned a lot as well. Tell me, is there any place people can find you online, or things that you want to plug for the audience?
The best place for folks in the audience, check me out on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always open to chat with folks, especially people that are starting in their marketing career. There's a lot of places that you can go in this space, and it's very big and broad, and I love to help out new people in it. You can obviously go to Provalytics as well.com. There's a link there for the attribution certification, but if you want to check that out, you just go to attributioncertified.com and enroll for free and learn a bit more about the changes that are coming that'll better inform you and help you do a better job in your career.
Getting informed. That's what we aim to do for the audience. And Jeff, yeah, I'm definitely going to reach out on LinkedIn at some point. Maybe poke your brain a little more about this career stuff, because I myself have been, making the grind to get in there, to break into the marketing branding business. So we'll see where it goes. But that has been another episode of Talking Marketing, folks. We have a new ad spot here at the end for our AMA job board, and our sponsorship team has helped out with production of that. Otherwise, all the plugs will be at the end. But again, thank you to Jeff Greenfield, the CEO of Provalytics, for joining me. We will be back in 2 months for this new season of Talking Marketing. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye. If you enjoyed this episode of Talking Marketing and you want to hear more of our conversations with marketing professionals, subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other major podcast platform of choice. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube as AMA Boston. And most importantly, if you'd like to support the work we do here, please consider becoming an AMA Boston member by heading over to amaboston.org/become-a-member. AMABoston.org is also the #1 place to find all of our work, including the AMA Boston blog, events calendar, job board, and a whole suite of ways to volunteer with our team. We get to keep doing this thanks to the support of listeners like you. Thank you.